Welcome all. Today I'd like to cover quite a few things in this video, and because I don't really like doing these YouTube things because they're such a bugger to set up, I thought I'd cover quite a few things in one hit. Some of it may be of interest to you and some of it may not, but it covers quite a range of subject matter, so there's a little bit for everybody, whether it's a Blackmagic Pocket 4K owner or just the general camera user. So it might be worth watching it, or at least skipping over to the tail end of it where I talk about the more generic things that might be of interest. Now, one of the things that I've had, for those who have seen my previous videos, I've been using a fairly large rig setup with the Pocket 4K, weighing nearly 9 kilos. In fact, it was more than 9 kilos. And whilst I liked it, it was really good for general use and even handheld use. It was a bit problematic in the fact that I wasn't easily able to change lenses or do any other sort of modifications to it, because it was pretty much a fixed rig, and it really started to become noticeable when I wanted to try different lenses that I have. And so what I ended up doing was buying a second Pocket 4K and rigging that up into a more functional unit, if that's the right word. Both were quite functional, but this second unit became a lot more easy to handle around more of a run and gun setup. And after I did that, I realised that I really did need to reconsider my 9 kilo rig and try to put it onto a bit of a diet, because it was really large and sort of cumbersome, especially after using the other rig for quite a few sessions. And so what happened was that I pulled it completely apart and started rebuilding it using all the old bits and pieces that I had. And what you see here is the new rig set up in a slightly lesser form. Went from 9 kilos to about 5.5 in this current configuration. So it used all the bits and pieces, the tilter drive and the V-Lock battery and everything else out of that. So it's still a heavier rig and mainly for tripod use and stuff like that. But it is in itself a lot more functional now because it's a lighter unit. Not as easy to carry around because of the handles, but I do have the ability to put the handles back onto it, so that it does make it a bit easier for handheld use as well. But that's what led to changes in my big rig because of the new one, and I'll just talk about the new one at the moment. What I found was that it became so compact that I could put it into this little bag like this. It's 150 by 200 by 300 mil in size, or in the old vernacular, 6 by 8 by 12. So it's actually quite a small bag in itself, and it carries the camera and the bits and pieces of other gear as well. And I'll show you what it does, or what it contains. That is now my whole new rig. Run and gun, take anywhere, anytime. And what it actually contains is, first off, a set of Bluetooth headphones that connect to the camera so that I can actually listen to the audio, and I'll just talk a little bit about those shortly. It's got a Rode VideoMic NTG microphone and a wireless Go that fits into the front of the rail of the NTG, which is pretty handy. It contains batteries that will now allow me to use the camera for 4 hours non-stop. It's got the wireless Go receiver and a microphone in there. And the camera itself is quite a nifty little unit. It only weighs, with the batteries connected, for 4 hours of use, about 3.4 kilo. And setting it up is absolute child's play. Do that. It's a belt pouch for the batteries, and I'll talk about the actual components that I've got just in a minute. And that is now a complete ready-to-use rig for 4 hours of video recording. I've seen lots of variations on YouTube about different size rigs and so forth. There's been a couple that have been almost as compact as this, and most of them that I see don't actually use a microphone on their rigs unless they get rather large, so I don't know why. But this is really handy, and I'll just explain the bits and pieces that I put together here. First off, the Pocket 4K is in a small rig cage. Underneath I've got a 200mm Arcosys rail with a little lens support attached to the front end, just in here, which might or might not be visible. But I prefer that because it's going to be bouncing around in my four-wheel drive, so I'd rather have some sort of support to the lens on the camera body itself. So that's handy. It's really easy to take on and off, so there's no issues there. As I said, on the left, I've got the Rode Video Mic NTG connected onto the camera itself. Nice and handy in there. It's completely out of the way when I'm carrying it around. I can just carry it around on the handle as it is on the side, just like a digital SLR basically. So I've done that a couple of events so far, and it works really well. On the top, just on here, I've got the Samsung 1TB SSD and a small rig holder. Next to it, that little blue device, is an Avantry Bluetooth transmitter, which connects to my headphones via the receiver into the input. I had to go looking around to find a sort of a set of earphones that weren't horrendously expensive, and that allowed a 3.5mm input, and this works surprisingly well. So when you're out and about, I can hang this thing off my belt with a little Velcro strap and use it as I need to listen into the recording itself. At the front, I've got an Atomos Shinobi 5-inch monitor. It was sort of the cheapest one I could find that was at least 1000 nit, which is pretty much essential for our Australian summers and so on. And so that works reasonably well. A couple of issues with it, which I'll talk about shortly. On the side, I've got a little NPF battery adapter. This one's an Andoa brand that connects with a Weepu plug straight into the camera side 12-volt input, and powers through any variety of NPF batteries you want. One side's got a 12-volt output and the other side's got a 7.2, so you could theoretically, and I have done it, run the monitor from it as well, but obviously it reduces the recording time. And at the front, I've got a Tilta mini matte box, which is pretty good overall, but it does have a little bit of an issue, which I'll talk about as a general thing about products. So what I've got here now is a very, very lightweight rig that I can pretty much carry around all day, get 4 hours of recording. I can have a little belt pouch which carries 2 extra batteries, get 8 hours of recording out of that without drama. In fact, my issue is going to be, will the SSD hold up to the recording time? I have got a second one, so I can do that. Now, when it comes to the actual products itself, the Shinobi is a really good monitor. However, I do have one sort of annoying factor with it, or two really. The first one is that it takes 10 seconds to start up. So once you turn the camera on, which takes about 3 seconds, you sit there waiting for the monitor to come on. So you either got a choice of leaving it on all the time and chewing through the batteries, or turning it on when you need it and just waiting around. So you've got to be prepared to use it. And I noticed that if you put an SD card in there, a blank one, just to protect the slot, it actually takes 20 seconds to start up. And to me, that sort of 10 and 20 seconds is too long for a monitor to start up. They brag about taking 5 seconds to turn it off so you don't accidentally turn it off, but why it has to take so long to turn on is beyond me. So that was one of the real annoyances that I have with it. The second one, in a way, is the fact that it doesn't come with a power input. Obviously they kept the cost down, but rather than having a headphone output, I would have preferred to have a power input into it, and that way I could have run it straight off the MPF adapter that I've got there. What I actually did was cut the 240-volt power adapter that they provided with the Shinobi, and put in a little plug connector into it so that I could either run it off 240 if I wanted to, or that can then go into the MPF adapter. It's a solution, but a 12-volt input or 7.2-volt input would have been great, because then I could have put a battery in there and had backup with the system itself, and ran a sort of a smaller battery, a 2-cell MPF instead of a 4-cell, to give me the extra time to match up with this one. The issue I've got with the Tilta, and I've actually contacted Tilta about it, is that it can't put any filters in there and use a lens that's wider than a 24mm full frame equivalent focal length. So the angle of view, if it's 24mm or wider, it'll vignette. And depending on exactly what sort of filter you might want to put on there, like the variable NDs, which I have, it could vignette quite badly. So that part of it kind of wasn't designed, and it's annoying that no reviewer mentions the fact that if you use a wider angle lens, variable NDs, or any filter for that matter, even if you put a lens protector, it'll vignette. It doesn't matter whether you put it onto the lens and then the adapter on top, or whether you put the filter inside the adapter itself, it will vignette up with a 24 or wider lens. And I find that kind of annoying. I don't really see why they didn't test for it and work out that that is problematic. I mean, how wide do you go? I'd say 24 is a pretty common lens for most people to use, videographers or anybody else, so I would have thought that 24mm would have been at least something to aim for. But other than that, it's a very, very good adapter, or so I should say matte box. In fact, I contacted Small Rig, who are quite amenable to hearing for ideas about making a lightweight matte box, and they're doing that at the moment, but I'm just gobsmacked that theirs currently it weighs half a kilo. I mean, why on earth bother doing that? Because that is just ridiculous weight if you want to attach it to a lens. So that's sort of a bit of an issue that I've got with that, and one of those things that nobody ever mentions. And the same thing with the Shinobi. No reviewer that I know of has mentioned how long it takes to actually turn on. So is that emitting things by intent or not just testing it thoroughly? I don't know. But I'm telling you now that that's a couple of little issues that I have with it. Now, the other thing that I want to talk about is battery life. One of the common things with the Pocket 4K, people constantly complain about, right up to this day, is the saying that it's got an abysmal battery life. Now, I sort of gone through testing it with a whole bunch of different batteries, and I'll give you some feedback, and I'll put this little chart up on the as a JPEG further down in the video thing itself. You can actually click on it and download it so you can see what I've done. But I've got a bunch of batteries. One brand is a Bonacell, which is very common in Australia on eBay. The other one, which I'm using generally on this, is a brand called Jinboshi, and I had a bit of a discount or a credit at a photo store, so I bought an IDX battery, which is not exactly cheap. I'll just get the prices for you shortly. And then I've also got some Tyka batteries, or Tika, T-Y-C-K-A. Don't know how you actually pronounce it, but anyway, I got them years back for the video lights, and then I tested it with a Canon battery. So what I've done is I've tested the thing by having it the same setting, 2.4 to 1, 4K DCI at quality 0 on the Blackmagic Pocket camera, and just pointed at a particular scene and just press record and just test out how the batteries will last, and just let it go until the camera stops recording. And you know, you could do other formats if you wanted to, but I just thought, well, that was it. That was the last format that I used when I was out and about doing a wedding. So I just decided to use that. So the Bonacell battery, which is a 4-cell battery, has a watt-hour rating of 40.3 watts, and they cost about $15 on eBay. That lasted 50 minutes, so that wasn't a very long time for that size of a battery. The Jinboshi, which is a 6-cell battery, has a watt-hour rating of 58.5 and costs around about $30, $25 to $30 on eBay. It actually lasted 180 minutes before the camera switched off. The IDX, which is also a 6-cell battery, it's a 48 watt-hour battery, so it's quite a bit less, but costs about $125, so it's 4 times more expensive, and it lasted 188 minutes, so that wasn't too bad. It actually went a little bit longer, and I'm sort of, you know, with the extra price, I think I would recommend Jinboshi anytime if you can get your hands on those. They seem to be pretty good batteries. The Tyka battery, which is a 2-cell battery, rated at 16.3 watt-hours, and they cost about $10 on eBay, lasted 35 minutes, which wasn't too long really. I thought it'd be longer. The Jinboshi 2-cell that I also have is 21.5 watt-hours and costs about $15 each, lasted for 50 minutes. So that Jinboshi 2-cell lasted just as long as a Bonacell 4-cell, so don't even ever bother buying a Bonacell if you see them on eBay. But the surprising thing of all is I then used the Canon OEM battery in the camera and set that to recording, and that's a 14 watt-hour battery, which generally costs around about $80, and that lasted 52 minutes. So that was pretty surprising as far as I'm concerned, and I hear a lot of people talking about how mirrorless cameras and digital SLRs, or the hybrid ones, their batteries last 2 hours and whatever, and they tend to brag about that and how long it lasts. Well, the interesting thing is I found, and I'll put the link down below, on Wolfcrow's site, which probably many know about, they did a test with the Panasonic S1, and shooting at AVCHD at 1080p, only managed 75 minutes of recording time, and they said that if they were doing 4K, they didn't say which 4K flavour, but they expected less duration than 75 minutes. So when you consider that the little 14 watt-hour Canon battery will give you 52 minutes of recording time, that's not too bad, given the fact that I think the Panasonic battery is about a 22, 23 watt hour battery, and it doesn't have a 5-inch screen, nor does it have active cooling. Now, just on the screen bit, when I did the recording on here, I actually have the monitor down to 10%, so I can read the screen if I want to change settings, because I've got a monitor, so I have both glaring out at full power. So how much that affects it, I don't know, but I know the active cooling would certainly be a power drain. So those people who say that the Pocket 4K has miserable recording time, well, I just call them to task. You know, people did proper testing with the other hybrid cameras and actually did the full similar DCI, 4K DCI recording. It'd be interesting to see how much recording time they actually get. So that's the sort of thing that I found out with those. So the Jimboshi batteries are excellent. I've actually ordered a couple of 4-cell ones for the monitor so that I can have, in fact, 4 hours recording time with it. So with the IDX battery, for example, at 188 minutes and the 52 from the Canon, that gives me 240 minutes recording time. So with a Jimboshi battery, just a couple of minutes less, but that's good enough as far as I'm concerned with 4K recording. So that's something to take home and note. If you can get those sort of batteries wherever you're located. I can only find one eBay seller that sells a Jimboshi brand, so I'm not too sure how rare they are, but they are very, very good batteries in my view. So basically, that's my little video setup, or my 2 video setups. I think they're quite practical and usable the way I have. I'm really enjoying this. I shot a wedding reception with this without the new lens I've got in there, so it was all shot handheld using a non-stabilised lens, and I don't think it came out too badly. And then just recently I did a show and shine using this 12-100 Olympus lens, which is stabilised, and it actually gives very, very good results. Not so good when I walk, but that's a training exercise really to get used to doing that if you want to move around and record at the same time. But this is just superb in my view. It's just so lightweight, relatively speaking, and is so practical and usable in the long term. Now there's one other thing that I want to talk about, and that's gimbals. I'm not a real fan of gimbals itself. I've got traditional gimbals and all the rest, and I can fit this camera onto it quite easily, quite quickly. In fact, I won't go through the show and tell on how it works, but I'm not a great fan of gimbals. I just don't sort of like the way they work, what they sort of results are sort of, the way they are. And what I've been thinking about, and I actually sent a bit of an idea to Fayutech, because they're the gimbals that I have, and they seem to be sort of looking at always making something new, is a suggestion that why don't they make a gimbal that is a little bit like this. Now, hear me out. My suggestion is that they make a gimbal with a flat sort of configuration of this nature. You have 2 pitch motors on the sides of the shaft that goes through, a common shaft, with a roll motor on the front. So all you would have to do is set up your camera in that sort of configuration. You don't have to have too much movement in the pitch and the roll angles, probably 5 to 10 degrees at most, because all you're going to be doing is holding it and allowing you to walk around. And what would this would really do is sort of emulate a glide cam, except a motorised one. Because when you consider the glide cams, all it really does is helps you to alleviate pitch and roll of the camera. It doesn't affect like the 3-axis gimbals do. You're just basically moving around. And I've been sort of playing around with this as a general sort of a handheld type camera setup. It works, but I prefer it without it. But I sort of started thinking about having a slightly better type of gimbal. A 2-axis gimbal would be great, because then you could load up everything on there, your monitor, your microphones. You wouldn't have to take them off because the 3-axis gimbal can't hold them properly, and you'd have something very lightweight. Just imagine you'd be packing away something that's just like that, barely larger. I mean, it's only going to be, the roll motors put on the middle section, and an ECU in there, which all it needs to do is just control the weight that is being set up, and balancing would be just nothing. You just have as long as they stick a Arca Swiss mount on it, you can get a long plate that you can slide up and down quite easily, and just have a little counterbalance system for the roll. And I reckon that thing would sell like hotcakes. if they could come up with something like that. I don't see any reason why it wouldn't work. The roll motors that they have nowadays are very powerful and can hold up some pretty substantial camera gear. It's just a matter of some lateral thinking and coming up with a solution. The batteries could be in the handles, and even they could put a focus control onto the handles like the Fayutech has at the moment. But even keeping it simple with nothing more than power through there, I reckon that thing would be an absolute ripper of a device to have. But for holding currently, I just prefer to hold the camera as it is, like this, underneath. It balances quite well. There's no real issues with holding it, but I like being able to do it this way. It just reminds me of my old medium format camera days, looking down, holding the camera down at waist level, and just giving a different perspective to what a lot of people do with always putting the camera at eye level or shoulder level, which brings it up to about eye level. So this is actually well balanced, easy to hold pretty much all day long. So I was just thinking that if you wanted to get good stabilisation, a flat type 2-axis gimbal could actually be a pretty good idea, perhaps. But anyway, that's all I've got to say for today, and hope there's some ideas for you and a bit of information to help you out. So I'll just say now, cheers.